I would like, if I may, to take you on a strange journey.
Hello and welcome to the Cultworthy Cinema Podcast. My name is Antonio, I'm your host, and I've got a very special guest returning to the show. Haven't had him on since Animation April of last year, where we talked about Metropolis, my good friend Phil of the Making Tarantino podcast. Welcome back, man.
Yes, it's been a while. That Metropolis was so good. I think about it almost every day. Yes, it's lovely to be back on. Thank you for having me. I always enjoy it.
Anytime I can see someone else's physical media collection behind them, as I do with me, I always feel like I'm in good company.
I got this from you. I was redoing The Office, and I said, where should I put my desk? On the end of a wall? And then I go, no, I can put it in the middle, have this behind me. So, yeah, because of Antonio.
Oh, that's awesome. You have a Once Upon a Time in the West poster on your wall. I've got one on the opposite side of mine. Now I might have to put mine behind me. But yeah, great minds think alike.
This one is The Thing. I have The Thing, E.T., and Once Upon a Time in the West. And then I have Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, like over there. But yeah, it's that was hard to pick out which ones you exactly want for the walls. Like, well, I love all these movies. Like, what are the specific ones that are going to go on the wall?
And then I was on your show, I think around like summertime, maybe early fall, where we did the Siege of Pinchgut.
Yeah.
And dude, that movie made my discovery list for 2024. It didn't make the top 5, but it made the top 10. And I tell people about it all the time that it's a great movie. Aldo Ray's fantastic in it. And it's just like one of those movies that's been under the radar. And so you bringing it to your show and letting me see it for the first time and talk about it was such a great experience. Like I said, it made the list. So again, great minds think alike.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so good.
So now we're kicking off this new year. We're in 2025. It's the third, fourth week of January, where we're about to go into February. I've recorded some Valentine's episodes to get all the romantic stuff out of the way. And now we get to go into things that I really want to talk about this season. And that is genre movies, exploitation movies, action movies. But there is one genre that I'm a huge fan of. And I've had them on the list for the last 4 years. And no one ever picks them. And so I'm glad that you did. And that is the most dangerous game genre, where it's man hunting man. I have episodes in the list that people never pick, like Turkey Shoot, and the one that we're talking about today, we've got a double feature of Hard Target and Surviving the Game, which I'm going to go ahead and say right now are probably my two favorite of the man-hunting man genre. How about you?
That's interesting. Yes, I love the original Most Dangerous Game from like 32. It's really good. And then this one, I hadn't seen Surviving the Game since the theater. So I was like, okay. And I remember it being better, but also some things that just hit me today was like, oh, wait a minute. Like, it's better than you think. And it is that thing. There's something about us wanting to be like, I want to be that guy. Like, somebody pick me. I think I could survive. But the truth is, end up like, being like, hey, I'm over here. Hey, let's talk.
I'd make it maybe like half a mile away from the cabin and then I'm done. I'd be winded, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And not knowing where you're going. Like,
Another one that's on the list that I think is a guilty pleasure, loved by some, hated by many, is the John Leguizamo movie, The Pest, where Jeffrey Jones hunts him through like the Everglades and through the woods of Miami. That is another one that I think gets way overlooked because people forget that it is a dude getting hunted by a rich guy, because it's more about like the potty humor and the Cuban humor and all that other stuff. But that's another one too, where it's like, it's got its time and place in the 90s, which I'm a 90s baby. I loved that movie growing up. I still love it. It's on the shelf, but it's a hard one to get other people to get on board with. So I think that's why that one hasn't been picked in the last 4 years.
It's interesting, though. You and I've talked about it on the show. If you do a movie for the show, it makes you dive a little deeper and you're enjoying it a little more than you might
Uh-huh.
have before. And with The Pest, my cousin said, we got to go see this movie. And I love John Leguizamo's stand up. We went and saw The Pest. I was like, what the fuck? Like, this movie is horrible. And then, but the more I think about it and when I see clips, I'm like, it's just like that movie with Martin Short being the kid. Like,
Right, Clifford.
yeah, Clifford. It's got that humor to it. You just got to watch it and just let your mind go and just have fun because it's crazy. But speaking of Turkey Shoot, though, I just saw Turkey Shoot like last year for the first time, where Eric Clapp was like, "Hey, you haven't seen this? You should check it out." I watched it and I was like, "Oh my god!" And then shortly after that was when Olivia Hussey passed away, and it was like, "Oh man." But yeah, that's a
Right.
fun one. Yeah,
It's a real fun one. I mean, it goes back to that whole like Hunger Games and Battle Royale kind of thing too, survival of the fittest hype. And then let's not also forget that I did speak with Eric earlier in the year. We did Death Hunt with Charles Bronson and Lee Marvin. That's not necessarily a man-hunting man movie for sport, but it is a manhunt movie, more like The Fugitive. So it's kind of hard to like disassociate those two genres. For me, this is the one where it's like someone is literally abducting usually a homeless or lower income person or a stranded person or a political prisoner, and then the elite hunt them for sport. That's like its own thing. And like I said, the two that we picked, I think are really, really great to put back to back. And I watched them as a double feature the other day, and they work so well back to back. We'll talk at the end of the episode which one we think would play better first and which one is our favorite of the two. But let's get into the meat of it first and talk about surviving the game. Cue dramatic music. So this 1994 film, directed by Ernest Dickerson, follows a homeless man named Jack Mason. His life takes a dramatic turn when a wealthy businessman named Thomas Spear offers him a job as a hunting guide in the wilderness. Desperate for money, Jack agrees. However, he soon learns that he has been lured into a deadly game. Spear and his elite group of wealthy hunters, including character actors Gary Busey, F. Murray Abraham, and John C. McGinley, have orchestrated a twisted hunt where Jack becomes the prey. They intend to track and kill him for sport, seeing it as the ultimate thrill. What follows is a tense battle for survival as Jack uses his street smarts and resourcefulness to outwit his pursuers. He turns the tables on the hunters, using their own traps and environments against them. Now, this film, I think, cannot even begin to be discussed without talking about how amazing the cast is. What a cast, bro.
it was one where I said, okay, got to watch this for the podcast. I didn't look up anything. I knew what the gimmick was. I knew the main thing. This is why we're picking it. It's a, guy being chased by the elite. And I remember Ice-T being in it, but I don't remember Gary Busey, John C.
Charles S.
McGinley,
Dutton.
and then Charles S. Dutton, and then F. Murray Abraham shows up, and I'm like, he's in this movie? Like, oh my God. Like, it's just, yeah, it's great. And there's a dialogue that Gary Busey gives that's the best of, like, one of the best things he's ever done is him telling that story. It's so great.
I like to think of that moment as like his Quint monologue from Jaws. It's like the Indianapolis monologue. And when I was like doing a little bit of research, I found out that he actually wrote that scene himself. He wrote that monologue himself because he didn't like the monologue that they had written him originally. And mostly he kind of improvised it on the spot. And so once he's done in it, in the film, Rutger Hauer's smoking a cigarette and says, "Bullshit." That wasn't a line. That was literally him saying bullshit to that monologue, and they kept it in. So you've literally got some of the best villains from cinema in this movie. You've got Rutger Hauer, who is, I'd say, in the top 3 all-time greatest cinematic villains from multitudes of movies. You've got John C. McGinley, you've got Gary Busey, Charles S. Dutton, who's normally a good guy, but very villainous in this, And then one of my favorite villains of all time, Salieri from Amadeus, F. Murray Abraham. And his character is fun because like he is a dad who, I mean, he could have taken his son to like a whorehouse, right? To get laid and make him a man. But instead, he takes him on a manhunt to prove that he is a man and not just a soft city boy. That guy, played by William McNamara, who, if you haven't seen the film Copycat, is the villain in Copycat. And he didn't really have a whole lot after that, but he is very impressive in the movies he's been in. He's also in Dennis Hopper's Chasers with Tom Berenger, which is kind of like The Last Detail for like Gen Xers, another movie that's kind of gone under the radar.
Yeah. It's interesting with him because at first I'm like, this guy's whiny. He's like a Luke Skywalker. Like, I was going
He
into
is.
the station, pick up power converters. And you're like, oh my God. But it's that funny thing of his dad not telling him what we're doing. His dad just brings him there. And then they say, oh yeah, we're hunting this guy. And he's like, what the fuck? Like, wait a minute.
How the film begins. And again, Ice-T is always one of those performers. I'm not going to say actor, just performer.
Yeah.
Because he's a musician, he's a producer, he's a writer, he's a director, he's done pretty much everything. He always surprises me in things. And this one I think is probably my favorite role of his because he gets to lead the movie. Oftentimes he's like a bad guy or a supporting character or a co-lead, but in this he is the hero of the movie. He plays a homeless man who had lost his family in like a tenement building fire that he thinks is his fault. And so he has a very self-destructive side. At the same time, though, he also is trying to help other people in the homeless community. He's got people like in his inner circle. He has a dog and something happens to the dog. It kind of reminds me of like the Nick Nolte character in Down and Out in Beverly Hills, where like once the dog leaves his life, everything's just done. And he's just, Nick Nolte throws himself in a pool. This guy throws himself in front of a bus and he's rescued by a Charles S. Dutton for what we think are good reasons until we get into the thick of it.
Yeah. It's what's interesting with this too that people need to realize is like Ice-T was just getting into acting at this time.
Mhm.
So you knew him from like, oh yeah, he does, Cop Killer and all these songs. And then all of a sudden you see him and you're like, oh, this guy's good. He's got the charisma. This is why, like you said, he's a performer. He's got that thing. You can see it. And that he's a good actor in this. Like, you're like, oh, this is pretty cool. And I remember in the theater, like all those punchlines would have everybody hooting and hollering. It was great. Like,
He's got a lot of one-liners, and there is a lot of first blood in this movie. I think where it's like the hunted becomes the hunter, where he kind of turns it around. And one thing I can say about this movie that I do appreciate is that they let us into some of like the psyche of these people that are hunting him. I don't think they're trying to create empathy with us for these villains, but I always love it when we know a little bit about the villain's backstory. And each of them is given a moment to shine, where like Rutger Hauer and Charles S. Dutton, they kind of have their personal histories. Rutger Hauer is more just in it for the money than anything. Like, this is his business, right? If anything, he is the sociopath of the group, the non-empathetic one. He just wants the money. Charles S. Dutton has a homeless background to his life, and so he sees homeless people almost disgusting because he's turned his life from that to something else, almost like, I'm better than you now. We have John C. McGinley, who's going through personal trauma and loss. Gary Busey is reliving childhood trauma with that amazing monologue about his dad turning his dog against him. Like, it makes the story that much better when we actually get reasons for why these guys are doing the hunt, instead of just, oh, they're just the elites and they're hunting these guys for fun.
yeah, there's also, it's that thing where they're not just cookie cutter characters.
Correct.
They each have their own thing. And it's that thing when he talks about killing his kid and John C. McGinley right away gets angry, and it makes you like, oh, like you're uncomfortable at this dinner. Then with the Gary Busey thing, you're even more uncomfortable, and you're like, and you can see it in Ice-T's face. Like, it's really, it's great because it's not that thing of the cookie cutter, bad guy.
Right.
And that's the other thing about talking about these movies. It moves them up, and then I go, oh, maybe I'll, you know, not to spoil it, but maybe I was going one way with this, and now I'm going, oh, wait a minute, you're
Right.
talking me into it.
Well, and that's the thing is like where I feel like this is so embedded in genre filmmaking because it's early 90s, it's New Line Cinema, and it does something very familiar of like the 80s and 90s where there is a lower production value that you can kind of see and smell and taste the cost effectiveness, right? Like for example, you've got like that really kind of synthy saxophone stuff at the very beginning as the score. And then when the action starts, it kind of picks up. But at first you're like, what is this music? You can tell that like the setups are very simple. The action can't be really captured that great in some of the moments because they didn't have all of the necessary equipment or time or budget to do it. But then you realize that Ernest Dickerson and this cast win you over with performance and execution. That's what makes this movie work because it does feel like a made for cable movie sometimes, but a good one because the editing's on point, the action scenes are on point, the stunts are on point. There's some stunts in there that I was actually really surprised by. And we both know that when you have a low budget movie, those stunts like that are twice as dangerous as a real movie because you know they only have like one or two shots to do it. The jump to the tree, the jump into the water, and my personal favorite, the explosion of the four-wheeler with a dude on it. Those all hold up. Like those scenes, stunts, and performances are way better than this film deserves.
Yeah. Yeah. It's there. It's interesting because also it is that cool moment that we all like when he's running, they go, we'll give you till breakfast. And you're like, oh, he's got a
Right.
lot of time. This is great. And then when he does flip the tables on him, then you're like, oh shit. Like he does the cigarette thing. And then they're like, oh shit. Like all that stuff that starts adding up. And now, like you said, the hunters become the hunted, and it just works so well. And it's the all those things of like that explosion of that four-wheeler. I was just like, holy shit. Like you think like he's gonna run and jump off it, the guy will run away and it'll blow up and get rid of one of their no, he blows up and you're like, holy shit. And then seeing him with no legs, you're like, oh my God, this is awesome.
Right. Yeah. That okay, so if I had to complain at all about this movie, apart from the music at the beginning, I feel like the writer didn't realize how good some of the performances were going to be. So when they shot the movie, some characters feel like they're in the movie too long, and other characters feel like they're in the movie not enough. Gary Busey, number one. Spoiler alert, everyone dies. But Busey's the first one out in this. And that's a shame because he is bringing energy to this movie that I feel like he hadn't brought in a long time because he still was playing villains in action movies. And I'm not going to say Busey ever phoned it in. I just feel like he never had a role that was written well enough for him. So he did Busey stuff to make that character better. But then here he has a role that's written really well and delivered really well. And then we lose him right off. Where I feel F. Murray Abraham's role is kind of like the most useless of the three guys. And he's given the longest amount of screen time than anyone else.
Yeah, yeah. And you're like, oh, F. Murray Abraham's in this movie. And then he's just kind of a secondary character or even third,
Right.
like you said. You're like, no, I care about these other people. I don't care about him,
Right.
as much. But yeah, Gary Busey in this. Like we just did The Howling last year on my podcast. And he's so fun in that. And he seems like just being himself, but also, him kind of rewriting stuff then. But he's not a bad guy. And that's what's cool about it. But when he is a bad guy, Under Siege, this, Lethal Weapon, you're like, oh yeah, give me more.
Drop Zone.
Your drop zones. Yeah. So yeah, it is that thing of you want Gary Busey to be longer and you would have wanted F. Murray Abraham to die quicker. Like that would have been the switch to make. But then also in a way, if you're thinking about like Gary Busey and Rutger Hauer, I could see them fighting for screen time, not physically, but in that way of like who I want him to be the lead, and I don't, you know what I mean?
I've read Rutger Hauer's autobiography, which is an amazing read. It's called Tears and Rain, if you've never read it. And he doesn't mention this movie at all. And he mentions a lot of his really obscure ones, but this movie doesn't even get mentioned in passing, which is a shame because I'm kind of fascinated by the character of this, where, you know, he is like the ringleader of this villainous posse, yet he plays cool as a cucumber. Like he doesn't have any big dramatic moments or outbursts or breakouts. He's kind of the guy that holds it all together. And when we talk about our second movie, there's a juxtaposition to that, but he really is kind of like the stabilizer for this group of guys. But this is the thing that I never really thought about until this most recent rewatch, and I've watched this movie so many times. The Charles S. Dutton relationship with him, the Burns and Cole, they are essentially the guys that run this together. I'd love to see like the backstory. I'd love to see a prequel to this, like have how they put this thing together. It almost feels like there is, I'm not going to say a homoerotic relationship because that's like the label that people these days would put on it, but there is something between the two of them where neither of them have any empathy or attachment to anyone in this group. Any of these guys could live or die and they give a shit. But the two of them have like an emotional connection with each other. So when Charles S. Dutton's character gets horribly maimed by this explosion, Rutger Hauer has to give a mercy killing, which is a really great moment. It's a really great scene. It's so well acted. I'm like, this is a cheesy B movie that I saw on cable 1,000 times, and this moment works so well. And Rutger Hauer actually cries in that scene. I'm like, shit, this is something really deeper with these two characters, and it made me invest myself so much into their story, even though they're the bad guys.
And where they know, don't talk to him right now. There's that scene where after, you know, he does that, then he walks away and he's just staring at the river and he's just like not saying anything because, and nobody's going, what do we do now? Because they know that he's grieving and they just let it, you know, let it set for a bit. And then they talk to him. And it is that thing of, I was thinking that too, of like the power of their relationship of like, it's like me and the wife were talking about, damn it, what were we watching? But I said, no, they have this, or no, me, we were talking about the thing of Randolph Scott and Cary Grant. There's that big thing of they were living together and they were a couple, you know, they were gay maybe. And it's like, no, there's a thing where you can be really close friends with somebody and just be their friend. And you're a ride or die and you can tell them anything and you're just, and especially if you're two bachelors, you're like, yeah, we're not going to get married. Like, let's just hang out. And, but it's that thing with this where you're just like, yeah, there is more to it, but also, like you said, I don't think it's homoerotic. I think it's just they're just good friends who started this thing together and been through so many hunts and nothing has happened to them. And now things are happening. And the thing about Rutger Hauer being the way he is, it's so cool when him and F. Murray Abraham get in that kind of argument. F. Murray Abraham, he goes, you go over there then and do what you want to do. Don't be shooting. Don't be making noise. And he goes over there. And then Rutger Hauer's just quiet, like setting up the twigs and the trees to hide and putting on the makeup. And you're like, oh, this guy, now this is what he's always wanted. Like now, you know, kind of like a lot of those movies. It's like, oh, now I have a good adversary. Now I have a good opponent. Everybody else has been, you kill him right away, you know.
Because he's kind of like he's essentially like the safari captain. He's the game warden. He's not out there to kill. He's out there to make sure the guys have a good time who paid the money to kill. But that doesn't mean that he is jumping at the bit to actually be involved in this hunt. And that's the cool part. Because like, yeah, when he's hiding in those bushes, man, that's a great scene.
Yeah, it's a thing also where at breakfast, John C. McGinley, I think, was the one like, come on, man, we got to go. We got to go now. And he's like, no, enjoy your breakfast. We're going to, and you're like, oh, wow, he's really relishing in this. And he knows that the guy won't make it out. Like, we'll get it, you know, we'll get him. But that's the other thing where in the next movie, but where they have the history of the guy. This one, they don't. So they don't know where he came from, what he is. And they never really say, like, Ice-T is not an ex-military because he doesn't know
Mm-mm.
guns. He doesn't. So that's what's cool is he's just a guy that just knows shit, that figures out things. And that's what's cool when you just have somebody who's good, who you underestimate, just a normal guy that you just don't, you don't have a, Scott Adkins or a, whatever, a Jean-Claude Van
Yeah.
Damme. You just have a guy who's just a guy who's a homeless guy. But, you never underestimate. It's like I tell people, if you ran into Bruce Lee and you didn't know Bruce Lee was Bruce Lee, you'd be like, who's this? My dad would be
Yeah.
like, who's this skinny fucker? I'm going to fucking, he thinks he's big shit. And that guy will fucking hand you your ass in a hat. So it's like, okay.
Yeah, no, I like that. It's kind of like the unspoken hero that we get sometimes in movies where we do get a little bit of exposition onto why he is homeless and why he is kind of self-destructive, but very little else beside that. He could have a military background. He could have, a background of maybe he was a prize fighter. Who knows and who cares? It's not important. It's the action of the movie and how we are dedicated to this 2 hours that they give us. We don't really care about the backstory. We don't need it. And I think that's sometimes where movies like this can fall victim to being over expositioned. Too much backstory, too much, this is why he's like this. Sometimes we just want a good, fast paced movie that entertains us, gets it over with. And this is a perfect example of that. And Rutger Hauer is given just enough opportunity to ham it up a little bit, especially at the end when the dude dresses like a priest as he's on his way out of the country. That whole last scene, which, I mean, it's kind of gimmicky, but I
And the
love
old
it.
lady, can I have some money? Get out of here. Yeah.
At first, he's like, bless you, my sister. And then he's like, fuck off. All right. So I'm going to give it 2 wins and 2 losses. I'm going to give you my losses first. My complaints about this movie. Number 1 is the music. And then I'd say that number 2 is, like I said, the dedication of time to characters that aren't as interesting as the characters that were taken away from us too early. Those are my 2 biggest complaints. 2 biggest wins, though, man. The cast, 100%. And Ernest Dickerson is an amazing director who he's been given lots of money and been given some good things, but he's also made a lot of low budget stuff that come out well. Tales from the Crypt, Demon Knight, low key one of my favorite horror movies of the 90s, and he brings the same kind of energy that he had with this one. I think this one came out first, but you can tell why they gave him a shot at a movie like that, because the dude knows how to make energetic films and he knows how to make his voice heard. Because a lot of his movies are based in like black cinema, like Bones, a lot of African American cinema based on African American characters, where this has that, but it also doesn't feel like it's only focused on that. We do get the side stories of these guys hunting them, and it's more about culture and classism than it is about race. And that's why I really love how this movie plays.
Yeah, well, let me ask you something about if you didn't give F. Mary Abraham as much time, would it be as cool at the end when when they do separate and he's like, do whatever. And he is not the regular hunter like Rutger Hauer is, to be quiet and just sit there. Like people
He's
say, like
rage.
there's certain people that can hunt deer, certain people that can't sit in a blind forever because they get bored. Like they're
Yeah.
like, no, I need to make noise or talk. And so I do agree. F. Murray Abraham does get a lot more, but I think it's also because it's his son, and that's what happens. I do agree with you though, but with that end part of him finally, like you're slowly seeing him going off the rails. Like now his son has been killed. Spoiler alert. And you're like, and that's a thing where he's hanging there, and it's a legit, like not a regular, like just knocked him off off a thing like King Kong, like just rocking it. He's hanging off the side. He can't get any handhold. And all that stuff was like Rutger Hauer breaking the branches to get off of there. And that kid hanging there and F. Murray Abraham, like not being able to get him and he falls. You're like, oh shit, not as good as a cliffhanger, that girl falling in cliffhanger, but
Truth.
it's pretty good. It's like, oh my God. But I do like where, and that's where I don't know if you took some of his screen time out, would that end part when he finally goes crazy and just shooting and being loud and being like, come and get me. And, you know, but on my thing, yes, all the actors, the characters, all of that is great. All the actors are great in it. Like I said, John C. McGinley, like I'm like, oh shit, yeah, he's in this. This is amazing. And everyone in there is all the characters being different as opposed to the next one we're talking about, where it's awesome. And the thing about Rutger Hauer's character, like you said, of that you don't think about until you put them together, that you're like, oh yeah, he's a different bad guy. And what they say about bad guys is if you believe that you're doing the right thing, like Roy Batty is like, well, I'm surviving. Like this is a
Yeah.
thing. Like, and you're like, and same thing. Thanos is like, well, I destroyed half the world. Like it's fine. Half the universe.
But I'm justified.
Yeah. And, but yeah, it was one. So I'll tell you where I watched this and I go, oh my God. Like I remembered really liking it in the theater. Then I saw it this time and was like, oh wow, that wasn't as good as I thought. But then the more that I sit with it, the more I enjoy it. And the thing of, I don't know when it happened, but what I do hate, but I was thinking about it for this movie. There's that thing where in the beginning we talked about he doesn't know guns. He's like, look, I found a gun. And his mentor is like, dude, you always check the gun first because it could blow up in your hand. Okay, it's just said, it's gone away. But then there was later on, maybe in the late 90s and mid 2000s or early 2000s, was when it started to be a thing. Don't check that. And you knew, oh, that's coming. That's going to come later. Be careful, little girl. And that's going to come later. Nobody tells that little boy, don't run out in the street. A diesel will hit you on Pet Cemetery. He just does it. And it's that thing Quentin talks about, the movie Hell House, where, what's her name? Blair. Linda Blair is like, oh yeah, I used to do mechanic stuff with my dad, and that's how I got money for college. And you're like, okay. At the end, when the car won't start, she pops a hood, and Quentin says in the theater, everybody yells, oh yeah, she's a mechanic. Those are the things that you like. But then movies became, because I was like, oh, are they doing that cheesy thing of like check the barrel? But I didn't see it coming until at the end when he, because you're like, oh shit, he left the gun there. You're not thinking about it. And that's what's cool. Later on, it became, oh yeah, there's going to be a thing, So I just, there's something about 90s movies that are great. Like some of these thrillers, these 90s sex thrillers, whatever.
Dude, 90s erotic thrillers have a special place in my heart, as do 90s corrupt cop and internal affair movies. Like that was the decade for those two genres, man. And this isn't one of those, but I feel like it swims in the same waters of this is cheap entertainment, but it's done well.
Yeah. It's all that. Judgment Night like was around this time. Like that.
Oh,
was
hell
great.
yeah. Judgment Night's fucking great. Yeah. Stephen Hawkins. All right. So moving on to the next one. This is a year earlier than Surviving the Game. And I'm not going to say that Surviving the Game is a reactionary film to what this is, but just like we've seen in years past, there's always that thing where it's like, we're going to have 2 volcano movies, we're going to have 2 meteor movies, we're going to have 2 magician movies, right? We had 2 hunting man movies in essentially the same year. So 1993, we've got John Woo's American debut, Hard Target. The year is 1993, and we meet Natasha Binder, a woman searching for her missing father who uncovers a dangerous game being played in New Orleans. Rich businessmen have been hunting homeless people for sport, and her father was one of their victims. To help her, Natasha teams up with Chance Boudreaux, a tough ex-Marine and drifter with a troubled past. As they dig deeper into the organization behind the hunts, they discover that wealthy individuals are targeting people for a brutal, high-stakes game of human hunting. Chance becomes their primary target, leading to a series of intense and explosive confrontations. With a blend of martial arts, gunfights, daring stunts, Hard Target showcases Van Damme's iconic physicality and John Woo's signature style of slow motion action sequences. The film blends gritty street level crime with over the top action, creating a high energy, suspenseful thriller. Now, this is definitely a cult classic, and it is my first introduction to John Woo. I saw this in the theater. I did not know what Hard Boiled was. I didn't know what The Killer was in 1993. However, after this came out, I definitely went to Blockbuster and tried to find as many John Woo movies as possible. And then Broken Arrow in like 95 or 96 was his next one. And my dad and I went and saw that, and we loved that too. So this is, I'm going to say, of the American films he made, the closest to the high octane energy of his Hong Kong action flicks.
Yeah, it's when I saw this, I was so excited because I had seen The Killer my cousin rented on VHS from a comic book store, and we got home, we watched it, and it was the first movie ever that it was done like, we stayed up. I spent the night. We stayed up. He's like, I'm going to bed. I'm tired. It's 5 a.m. I go, that was amazing. I want to watch it again. So I rewound it, asked his parents, can I watch that again? Do you guys need the living room for any? They're like, no, go for it. Watched it again by myself and was blown away the same. And then I see Hard Boiled and I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. And then I'm like, oh, he's doing American. This is going to be cool. And then you see it and I'm like, oh, like, but watching it again, first of all, I rented it on Amazon Prime.
Mhm.
It looks like it's the 4K version that Kino Lorber came out with or
It's
whatever.
so good, right?
Amazing. I was like, I have never seen this movie look that good, but it might have been because Eric one day was like, oh, I found a copy of a assembly cut of Hard Target.
Hard Target.
He's like, do you want it? I go, yeah. So he sent it to me and I watched it and it's real shitty. Like it's, it's got the time code on the bottom. And a lot of the scenes were just more of the same and just a lot. And you're like, oh, and the ending was a little different. But so watching it also on that real shitty version, now watching this clear, but no, this was crisp. It made me want to go and buy it because I don't own it because I'm like, in a way, I'm like, I should own John Woo, but then I go, nah, but then I go, yeah, like watching it this time, there's certain scenes that we will talk about that are like, it's a little bit like, okay, but there is some cool shit in it. And it's just this fun thing. Like, it's amazing.
One of the things that can be said about this movie is that it definitely feels New Orleans, right? So I love it when action movies or action dramas are set in New Orleans. I love the movie The Big Easy. I'm madly in love with a movie called Johnny Handsome with Mickey Rourke, directed by Walter Hill, where the bad guy is Lance Henriksen and it's set in New Orleans and everyone's sweaty. I love that as an environment. For an action film, it's great, especially with the idea that we are hunting homeless people in New Orleans. It's not just in like the swamps and the bayous. They're hunting them in the middle of town. Like they don't give a shit. And the reason they get away with it is because the cops are on strike. That's why there's no police presence in the city. What a great way to explain why you can just go out and shoot people. Fun. And Van Damme might be the nicest dressed and most perfectly coiffed homeless guy I've ever seen in a movie.
Exactly. It's a thing also, if you've been to New Orleans, like I went to New Orleans in 2000 for Mardi Gras, and it's really fun, but we went during the big party time down, Whiskey Row or whatever. So yeah, that like, but yeah, when you see like barely some people walking around and, them just running through the streets, but it is so good to put it in that environment, to put it in the city and not in the forest. And going back to the thing about surviving the game, it's that thing of maybe they copied each other, but also Most Dangerous Game has been a book before it was a movie in 32 and before, and nowadays they have like a series that's a Most Dangerous Game thing and they have some other ones. But it's, yeah, there, and the Lance Henriksen being a bad guy is so cool when you see it at that time, you and I are like, young kid. You're younger than me, but you're going, oh my God, this is, I'm 53 now. So I was whatever, 23 something. So
Mhm.
I'm like, oh my God, like this is amazing. And then you watch it and you go, oh, he's really hamming it up. But also like there's that stuff of the coat on fire, like just really cool. Like, but it is that thing. I would have picked, I'm sure your weakness, we're not at weaknesses yet, but the girl, like Yancy Butler, like, come on. Like, I remember that name because I remember going, you should replace Yancy Butler. Like, take the cop and put her in the place of the girl. Like, that, like, a better actress, like something, you know. I know it's hard to act and hard to be in movies, especially I hear Jean-Claude Van Damme is like, a dick, but those are my words, not Antonio's. Don't sue him. Um,
I've heard the
and
same.
so, yeah, yeah. And so it's like, but yeah, I don't know. Yeah. And the homeless thing, but that's that thing where you said they give you this backstory and you're like, I don't really need to know that you broke this guy's jaw and da, 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 da.
The Yancey Butler, in her defense, I like her as an actress, but also she never really escaped the genre film world, because she was in this, and like a year later, she was in Drop Zone again. I'm mentioning Drop Zone twice in the same episode with Gary Busey in that one and Wesley Snipes. She's better in that because she's given more to do. This character kind of is hard because you're supposed to be the damsel in distress, yet you got to still run around with Jean-Claude Van Damme and be through these action scenes where, I mean, it's hard because I feel like she's a hard woman and a hard actress, and she has to play softer here until the end. That's a challenge. I think that's a challenge. Also, the character's not fleshed out really well. So I give her a little bit of a pass, but I agree with you. It could have been maybe performed and written differently. Forget about Jean-Claude Van Damme, though, because he just does what Jean-Claude Van Damme does. He never met a roundhouse he didn't like, right?
Yeah. Him and Chuck Norris. Yeah.
Yeah, him and Chuck Norris, just like John Woo's never met an action replay shot that he didn't like. I'm going to show this roundhouse kick from like 5 different angles and intercut them. I love it. It has a place in my heart from the 90s, but at the same time, you're just like, that's so John Woo.
The other thing that's John Woo that you don't realize until later, like then he would continue to make movies and there's a lot of melodrama, but that's coming from China. That's what
It
China
is.
does. That's what he does. So if you watch Once a Thief or all these movies, you're like, oh, there's a lot of melodrama. And that's what this is, of her being sad about her parents. Or you see, his other movies that have a lot of that. There's a scene all of a sudden where it's just melodramatic and you're like, okay,
The
it's like,
violin music plays, and we're going to show like slow motion shots of the little snapshot she has of her dad, or like opening up the case with all of his stuff. Yeah, you're right.
or like
It-
Mission Impossible 2, where he's almost like,
Mission Impossible 2 is the worst.
calm down with the music, calm down with the melodrama.
Or in Face Off, this Somewhere Under the Rainbow shootout. That's another one where it's just like, bro.
But look, when I saw that originally, I was like, oh, this is the John Woo that I wanted from Hard
Right.
Target and Broken Arrow, and I'm like, oh, this is what I got. I'm like, yeah, and I love that. But yeah, you watch it now and you're like, oh, it's so like Save the Kid and like her, like
The movie is made by the performances of Lance Henriksen and Arnold Vosloo as his henchmen. Those two together have perfect chemistry, and it is hard for me to name a better villain henchman duo, at least in that decade, maybe even the 80s, than those two. I was thinking about like what other ones can I think of? I kind of like Joss Ackland and the other dude from Lethal Weapon 2, that kind of villain henchman dynamic. But this one, just like the Charles S. Dutton Rutger Hauer relationship, these two have an intimacy again where it's like they almost can read each other's minds. And I mean, Vosloo is already great as it is. And based off of his performance in this, Sam Raimi and Rob Tappert, who produced this movie, made him take over Darkman in Darkman 2 or 3 and 3.
what else is interesting though is that when the one dies, you don't have a moment of Lance Henriksen's just kind of like, oh well, he died, in a way,
Yeah.
not as flippant, but not as, I would have liked it a little more like Surviving the Game, where
Yeah.
these are the conversations that I say that make me go, oh, maybe Surviving the Game's better than I giving it credit for.
Right. But I also like the fact that the story also amps up with every act, right? Because it starts off with good action. The second act got a lot of good action, and then once they're in the bayou and they meet up with Wilford Brimley as the Cajun moonshining uncle who raised him to be a street fighter or something like that. Which I have a blast with that character. He's hilarious in that
We
movie.
had a blast with the character.
Ye obviously had a blast with that, He was making all these dramas and Hallmark movies and stuff. He's like, I get to be in a Jean-Claude Van Damme movie, ride a horse and shoot a shotgun. I mean, like, I've met the man. I'm friends with his granddaughter. Until he passed away, he was out there riding horses on a ranch. Like, that's him. So you can tell he's having a blast doing that. But that's the thing about that third act where it's like they bring in all the dudes. Hey, everyone who wants to do a manhunt, that's the brilliance of that whole system he's got going on. Is like, hey, he's charging 50 grand, 100 grand, whatever, to go out and hunt a dude. Now he gets all of his best clients out, and they're paying him to hunt down Van Damme in the bayou. Like, I love this dude's thinking, and of course they all get trashed.
And it's the thing though, like you said right before that, when he's chasing the black guy, it's that thing of, like we said, you need a leader to be like, no, these are the rules. You can't shoot
Right.
him yet. You got to wait. We told him 5 minutes. You got to wait. And he's like, okay. But that's the thing where this military guy then is like, getting guns and getting shit. And, and then it's like you said, when that guy gets killed and it's like 4 different slow motions of him being shot and falling down. But there is a really cool shot that I just want to say before I forget. At the end, I love how the camera's like moving in and then just like pauses for a second on Jean-Claude and then does it again and like slows down and then pauses. I'm like, oh, that's great shit. Like, I love it.
Yeah. That whole ending scene in like the Mardi Gras float storage facility that's on fire, of course, because it's a John Woo movie, it has to be on fire, with the motorcycle, the motorcycle flying through the air with the gas can. That's a classic John Woo shot. You can't not fall in love with that whole action sequence. And that is one of the things that, like, I do have sometimes issues with John Woo movies, is that we will just spend way too long in an action scene where now it almost feels like I'm tired of action. I've gotten that way with the last 2 John Wick movies where it's like,
Or going up the stairs, getting knocked down. You're like, do we have to follow him again up the stairs?
again, yeah. This movie touches on almost being too much. And just when you feel like it's too much, something cool like that happens. So I give it a pass, right? That whole ending sequence is great. I mean, to me, that makes the movie, because we're not going to kid ourselves. The first half of the movie is not great. Like, we are praying that it's going to pay off in the end, and it does. And that's the thing where I think we can get to this point now. That's my biggest complaint about the movie, is that it's got too much movie in it. We don't need all of the detective work. We don't need all of the side stories with like the coroner and stuff. We get it. We get the city's is corrupt. We get that Lance Henriksen and Arnold Vosloo are badasses. We don't need all these little scenes to help emphasize that. And like you said, we don't need the melodrama that Yancey Butler misses her dad. Of course she misses her dad. We don't need all that. Take 20 minutes off this movie, chef's kiss.
And especially, maybe it's a John Woo Chinese thing. I don't know. It's that melodrama of her being like, he was homeless, like her being devastated by him being homeless and her not knowing. So maybe,
Right.
okay, but you're just like, okay, get over it. Like, okay.
Well, she also hasn't seen him in 20 something years.
Yeah, that's the other thing. I loved him so much, which reminds me of Raising Arizona, when she first gets a baby, she's like, I love him.
I loved him so much.
But another movie that does it great is The Hunt, where it starts out right away with them getting a box of guns, going, what the hell's going on? We're going, what's
Yeah.
going on? All the shootout. And then when it gets to her being like, it's a federal tax stamp for Tennessee, we're not in, I'm from Tennessee, whatever, you're like, holy shit, now shit's getting going. And same thing where you said, like, to cut it down to like Assault on Precinct 13 is probably one of the best movies that's just easy. It's just boom, 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 goes all the way through. There's no slow parts. There's nothing. You're just in it.
I would
And
agree.
there's no slow things of like, drama. The only drama is, should I unlock your thing or what? He's like, yeah, the guys are coming. You're like, yeah, open the fucking thing already, and her
Yeah.
getting shot standing there is cool. But yeah, it's so yeah, that's where, yeah, there is the stuff of setting him up, but you're like, we don't really need to set him up. We know we're in a Jean-Claude Van Damme movie,
Yeah.
so we know this is going to happen. But it is funny that the two people in the two movies are, there's Charles Dutton being like, hey, I can help you. You want some money? I can give you a job. And the other guy being like, hey, you hand out these flyers.
Right.
And the cool thing that I did like was they go, we need somebody. And he just gives them somebody. And they're
Right.
like, this guy had a family. What the fuck? But also, you're like, he hadn't talked to his kid in 25 years. He didn't say anything about it.
Right. There's rules that they have. Like they vet these guys really well, and that's why the system fell apart, is because the guy didn't vet well enough. Yeah, no, it's great. Like they do kind of fix it.
That guy's great.
If they had more money, that should have been Dennis Franz, in my opinion. That's like a
Yeah,
Dennis Franz role.
or the guy from The Crow. I can't think of his name, but he
Oh,
was in
John
Big.
Polito. Yeah, him too.
Should have been him. Like, oh, so great.
Yeah. So the last little tidbit of info that I have is like, yes, this movie was produced by Sam Raimi and Rob Tappert, and this is right on the heels of Darkman, right? So the reason why they were there was because this being John Woo's first movie, he spoke no English. The studio was worried that he might not be able to handle a film like this, that maybe there'd be conflict with Van Damme, maybe there'd be something where he just couldn't get the shots right or produced in time, not working with American budgets and American time frames. So Sam Raimi was literally on deck to replace him as a director, and they never needed to, so he remained a producer credit. And you cannot tell me that the infamous snake punching scene was not a Sam Raimi addition. That belongs in a Sam Raimi movie. It feels so out of place in this, yet it is the scene that everybody talks about.
Yeah. And the thing with that scene, because I wrote it down here, is it's those things where sometimes you go, just get to it. Like him being like, do you trust me? And he's like, close your eyes. And she's like, why do I have to close my eyes and trust you? And you're like, okay, if I was writing it, Snake would have already bit her. And now we
Right.
got to do something because we're taking long on this thing, like to make a comedy of that thing.
Right.
And then she's like, okay. And then she closes it. It's like this long moment of you're like, come on already. Like, what's going on? And then he punches it, and then he grabs a snake, and then she's freaking out. And I'm thinking, like, my thing of like Yancey Butler, like, but when her eyes open up, I'm like, oh, that's maybe they did this scene and they were like, oh, she's got beautiful eyes to open. Like,
Yeah.
it looks funny and cool and like she's scared. And then he just punches it and it knocks out. And you're like, okay, that's Van Damme could knock out anything. It's that Chuck Norris meme of like, there's another fist under his beard. It's that
It
kind of
really
thing.
is. It is for the laughs, but I tell you what, I dig it, and every time that and him surfboarding a motorcycle are like two things I will always remember about this movie.
Those are where it's the one thing of him doing that where in the theater everybody's laughing, because that was a time when I was going with my friend who she loved Van Damme, and we even drove to Prescott to find him when he was doing Universal Soldier, and we couldn't find him, but she was like, oh, I love him, so we went and saw the movie, everybody going crazy. That was cool. But then the thing with the surfing the motorcycle, I remember going, oh. And every time I watch it, I think that that's going to be longer and it's going to be more cheesy. And then I go, oh no, he's doing good. There's a guy riding it with one hand,
Yeah.
shooting. That's a real stunt guy doing that. Then it cuts to him. Now I'm like, well, you don't really need to get up there, but you've seen that on X Games or whatever. People can do that. But with
Right.
Van Damme doing it, you're just like, oh, like, come on. And then and you understand he's got to get hired to flip over but
He's
still
got to
that
do a double tuck over the truck.
rolling off of it and then landing and then spinning around to shoot. And you're like, that stunt guy's like, that he fucked up probably a couple times. Like, wait, where am I? I
Dude.
got turned around. But it's done really cool. And that's that thing of the 90s movies of like, and the 80s, like just shoot the car and it'll blow up. Like, okay.
Right. Shoot it 3 times, it'll blow up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so here's my question for you, man. We got the double feature. We did Surviving the Game. We did Hard Target. 2 very similar movies, very similar in theme, very similar in, I'm going to say, atmosphere and aesthetic. Which one do you put on top?
I have to say Hard Target, but it's difficult. Hard Target because of the action and because it's more fun. Surviving the Game is fun, but that's more of a but I agree with you on the way to watch it. Watch Surviving the Game and then Hard Target. Like you don't want to start with this, go to Surviving the Game, and people might be like, "Wait a minute, I was expecting this." But from this conversation, I've now been like, "Oh, Surviving the Game has moved up." Like I think I gave it 3.5.
You do that every time we have a conversation.
I tell you, it's always a conversation. I'll be like, I give this movie like on my podcast, I'll be like, I give it 3, and somebody be like, but dude, there was this and that and that, and I'm like, okay, I give it 4.
Now I
Like,
gotta
yeah,
give it
you're
4.
right. But it's the thing of I think I would rate them the same on Letterboxd, 3.5, 3.5. But the way Hard Target looked was amazing. It was real crisp and like the cinematography was amazing. But they're both good in their own ways. That's the thing.
Yeah.
You get the characters with Surviving the Game. So, yeah, I almost want to say Surviving the Game because of the Gary Busey, because of all that. But Hard Target, I've seen more than Surviving the Game, and maybe that's why.
Maybe.
But it is the only 2 things in Hard Target that I don't like. Well, Yancey Butler, but let's not count her. Him surfing on the motorcycle and the snake thing. But
Yeah.
now that I know the Rob Tapert thing and the Sam Raimi, I'm like, okay, I'm with it.
It kind of makes sense. It kind of feels like it's something that would be out of one of their movies. And see, for me, I'm a Surviving the Game defender all day. There is a Blu-ray out, which I need to buy because of right now, I still have the old like snap case cardboard DVD that's like 20 something years old. I've had it since I was a teenager. So it might be time to upgrade because I've never really seen that movie in full quality. It's either been on HBO or on a VHS or now on this like 20 something year old DVD. So that might be my next investment. But yeah, what wins me over for that one is definitely the Busey, the Rutger Hauer, just all the characters, and it's brisk. I feel like movies are just too long, John Woo movies especially, and it's not that I don't like how long they are, it's just they feel long sometimes. And Hard Target has moments that just feel long. Where Surviving the Game, I'm like, bam, 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 bam.
You've talked me into it. Surviving the Game, I'm voting because of that. Because of when they're at dinner, when they're at breakfast, whatever they are eating, dinner, and you're wondering when's the shoe going to drop, so there's tension there of like, are they going to tell him now? No, they're all friends, this is cool. And then in the morning when they're like, no, you need to go now, and he's like, what the hell's going on? And they're like, leave. And as opposed to Hard Target where they kill like 2 people before they even get to Van Damme. This
Yeah.
one is like we've seen them hunting somebody and now it's boom, which is funny
we're
with
off and
both
running.
movies doing a cutback of like, of him running through the forest and him running through the city and then showing Van Damme drinking coffee. So yeah.
I had fun with this conversation. I think this is a great double feature. And like I said, it works well together because sometimes movies can be too on the nose to double feature, especially if the same thing. Like, I wouldn't want to watch a Deep Impact Armageddon double feature. Fuck that. But this works because they're enough the same and enough different. And there's enough energy to both of them that you're like, okay, let's put the other one and let's go. So yeah, I would recommend this double feature for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I agree. There is that where, yeah, you're totally right. And then, of course, like you said, everybody should see Turkey Shoot. Everybody should see The Hunt. That was a cool movie. Like all these fun, like I don't think a lot of people, they're not doing those anymore. And now if they did them, somebody would probably a headline Hard Target redone, whatever. You're
Yeah,
like,
they
no,
would.
it's good. But
Well, Phil, thank you so much. Now, this episode will come out in the tail end of February. So, what you got coming up around that time?
well, my season 3 starts at the beginning of February, so I'm doing The Great Escape with Eric Clapp and Rich Johnson, they've done the UK Arrow release of The Great Escape. They did a video retrospective, video essay, and it's really good. And I don't have I mean, the 4K would play on whatever. I don't have a region free player, but I have The Great Escape on the Criterion channel, on the Criterion collection. So I'm going to watch that, but we're going to talk about all of that. And then I'm going to go back to, like you and I talked about last time, kind of doing the randomizer. Whenever you're on, we do the randomizer. And I'm like, here's what it picked. And you're like, cool. And that's what I'm going to start doing, instead of what do you want to do? And somebody goes taxi driver and the other person goes blowout. And I go, okay, well, wait, like, hang on. Everybody's picking all the good shit. Like, wait.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, you know me. Whenever I'm on your show, I want to do the thing that I have not seen. That's always the most fun for me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that Siege of Pinch Gut was so good.
So good.
And also, right, like, oh, so good. Everybody go check that out. It's on YouTube. But also, I'm doing on a Patreon, I have Shaping Scorsese, the podcast. So it's like $5 a month, and you get 2 episodes a month. And then I take pictures of press kits and put them up there. So, it's good stuff. So I enjoy it. I'm having fun with that. That's where, kudos to you for doing all these podcasts, recording. I'm like, how's the wife fine with that? Like, how is she not being like, you need to get back to bed?
The trick is do them weeks, if not months in advance, and always be editing so you're not just sitting in a block doing it. Get it done little bits at a time over that time, and then it feels like not time at all. It's great.
Yeah. It was funny because I could have recorded stuff early, but I took January off. I was like, I had pre-recorded shows from my other podcast, so I was like, I'm going to put those out. But anyway, yes, I'm having a good time. I always have a good time with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And you're on Instagram, you're on Facebook, you got a great Facebook page. You can find the links to that in the notes of this episode, and you can also find the links to all of his stuff in my Cultworthy Partners page on thecultworthy.com. Phil, it's a pleasure, and I can't wait to be on your show. I'm sure I will talk to you soon.
Me neither. You for sure will. So I can't wait. Thank you for having me again.